You may have noticed that I've taken the comments off these podcasts. It's just because the level of abuse is becoming so so prolific that I just didn't want to spend time having to deal with it. I could have left it there, but I just really don't want people's bile that they spilled into the comments section polluting the whole thing. So I'm afraid the comments are off. And if that isn't enough, these people go seeking out ways to contact me and sending me abusive emails and so on. And as Ernest Becker, the guy who wrote Denial of Death, said, if you talk about reality, and this is the topic of this particular podcast, the various taboos that our society has placed on things. If you talk about those things, people will hate you. They'll hate you because you're reminding them of things they don't want to be reminded about. Oh well, that's their problem. It's not my problem. And if all they've got is to resort to abuse, then they're wasting their time. Because if I see an email that is abusive, I just delete it. Don't even bother reading it. So let's get on to this. The taboos. By the way, I should add that for me, the one thing that keeps me doing this is the fact that on the Patreon channel, there's about 90 people who are not abusive and who, they don't agree with everything I'm saying, but basically there's good discussion on there, and I enjoy that. Anyway, taboos. So, what's the first taboo? Well, obviously it's death. Nobody wants to talk about death. Although in actual fact, if you're familiar with the Guardian newspaper, they've got a good series going at the moment. Some reporter who admits that she obsesses about death, which is very honest of her to say so. And they're talking about death. And some of it's very moving because they visit people who are in the last days of their lives and so on. Good series if you want to go and watch it. Anyway, the whole thing of death brings out the worst bigotries and dogmas that you can imagine. Why? Because people are frightened. Death, for most people, implies the cessation of their existence. And so, because, as the way that we tend to work is when we don't have the answer to something, we fill it in with crap. Like, when you die, you go to heaven. Or, when you die, there is nothing, just oblivion. Of course, nobody knows this. And so we fill it in. The atheists are just as bigoted as the religious folk in this respect. For some people, they're going to go and meet Aunt Gertrude after they die, their favourite aunt. Or there's just going to be oblivion, because we are made out of matter. Now, all of this is very, very crude thinking. And the atheists are just as crude as the religious folk. Because basically, we don't know what we are. I would suggest if you want to get a taster of that, you read Hoffman's book, Donald Hoffman. The Case Against Reality, I think it's called. He's a psychologist, and he's pulled in things from philosophy and science and so on. And I don't agree with everything in the book, but it's a gentle introduction to the fact that the world that we live in is a world of our own making. We don't know what reality is. So how the fuck can we know what life is? And particularly what death is? In reality, as Immanuel Kant said, time and space are actually just fabrications of our mind. So in reality, because there's no time, there is no birth and there is no death. But of course, people won't even approach the topic of death. So just to kind of smooth over the cracks in the wall, they paper it with, oh well, I don't know what's going to happen, and put it out of their mind, and then they've got a neurosis for the rest of their life. Or well, there's nothing, and again, they live really with some kind of fear, because even though they've said that, that's just the head brain. There's no emotion in that. The emotions are still fearful. And then there's the people who say, well, I'm going to go and meet my pet dog and so on. Well, again, it's make-believe. Yeah, I'm not particularly critical of that, to be honest. If people want to do that and it gets them through the night, so to speak, then then that's what they do. But there's a price to be paid for making things up, because part of us just doesn't believe it. It's only through really understanding that we can come to terms with some kind of understanding of death. And the basic thing about death is that because we don't know what we are, and because time is a construct of our own psychology, there actually is no birth and death. The mystery deepens with death. When you think about death sensibly and call upon the greatest minds that have ever contemplated these things, you realize that actually the whole thing isn't as frightening as it appears. Anyway, that's the first one, death. The second one is our emotional nature. Now, most people in the West particularly are almost completely out of touch with their fucking emotions. Because they're out of touch with them, the emotions run riot and can cause all kinds of problems. And people are just not honest about their emotions. So you get the people who are in total denial, what I would call the love and light brigade, the New Age types, maybe, who believe that they are loving, kind people, when of course they're anything but, because we all have one thing driving us, and that is the survival drive. The survival drive determines your emotions. End of story. When you're surviving well, you'll have pleasant emotions. When you're not surviving well, you'll have what are called negative emotions. So, the basic dynamic, which most people would not care to admit, is that when someone else is stronger, you feel weaker. And when you are stronger, other people will feel weaker if they see your strength. Because we are a planet of creatures, all driven by the survival drive, all competing for limited resources. So we're going to hate it when other people get more or are more successful, and we are struggling. And so, as Spinoza says, envy is the base emotional state for most people, which is basically pain at someone else's fortune and pleasure at their misfortune. The worst manifestation of that is Schadenfreude. Of course, the New Age types and the self-help types and all the rest of it, the people who've read Eckhart Tolle or Deepak Chopra or whoever, they hide these emotions away. The problem is they have to come out somewhere, and they come out in bitchy behavior or dismissive behavior or jealousy, but again, people can't admit jealousy and so on. So the whole of our society is based on pretend emotions, politically correct emotions. The reality is that most social intercourse is a process of boring other people and being bored by them. Why? Because everybody wants to essentially brag about what they are and what they do. They want to demonstrate their power. Oh, we've just got a 5-bedroom whatever, and oh, I've just got a 500 horsepower turbo nutter 4-wheel drive SUV something or other. It's just bragging. It's just people boring each other with their stories about what they've achieved and how great they are. So the love and light brigade and the politically correct brigade can never be honest about all of this stuff. And in fact, most people can't. Which is why Most people will happily go to some social event, do their bragging, be bored by other people, come away feeling pissed off, but then they'll go to another one because there's no reflection on the process that's actually taking place. So, the first taboo, death. The second taboo, our emotional nature, particularly envy and hatred, which are our base emotional states very often. The third taboo is purposelessness. People are desperate for purpose. Why the fuck are they desperate for purpose? Well, it's an ego thing. The essence of the ego is control. If the ego has a purpose, then it has control. So this is why we want purpose, and this is why we want meaning, because we want to be able to control. The fact we live in a universe where we have no control over anything, you don't know if you'll be alive in 5 minutes from now. You certainly don't know what you'll be thinking or what your emotional state will be. So there is no control, but we want it. So we want a purpose and we want meaning. Dogs and the universe, or the all, if you want to call it the all, have no notion of purpose. Everything struggles to survive, but that's not purpose, that's just a survival drive. There is no final end to all of this. There is no ultimate purpose. The universe is a meaningless thing. It just does what it does, because that's the nature of its own self. It just does what it does, with no meaning. So if the whole universe has or the whole of nature or the whole of existence has no purpose, then neither do the parts. Now, most people get fairly upset about that. And they get upset because they want meaning and purpose. Well, go and invent something. Go and read that book, God's Purpose for You. It'll fill the vacuum for a few days maybe. Because this is all we're trying to do. We're trying to fill the vacuum that our minds perceive. Our minds, because they can't control, feel like there's a vacuum. So we try and fill it. So to be able to live with no meaning and no purpose is an extremely freeing thing. It may not seem like it, but it is. But again, if you were to talk to people about, the whole of life is meaningless and purposeless, they'd think you were depressed. They wouldn't think you were happy, they would think you were depressed. And, the abusive comments I very often get from people are, oh, you're so depressed, blah, blah. I'm not depressed, I'm an extraordinarily happy person. Because I've been through all this shit. And I now have my own inner sense of power, or whatever you want to call it. I don't rely on fairy tales about God's purpose for me or whatever. So let's get to the fourth one, sex. People will never, in general anyway, talk about the real dynamics of sex. Fortunately, there's a lot of work being done in an area called evolutionary psychology, which sort of lifts the wraps on the whole thing. A lot of it is politically incorrect. I did one podcast on Patreon about men and weaver birds. I'll get to that in a moment. And it caused a little bit of consternation, but fuck it. These are scientific findings, the results from huge surveys. They don't fit with our notion that men and women are the same. They are not the fucking same. They're not, one is neither superior nor inferior, but they are not the same. Anyway, we have a sex drive because the species strives to survive. This is not some kind of hidden thing. It's just that the species that didn't strive to survive died out, obviously. So the most vicious, the most devious, the most brutal species are the ones that survive. And you can actually see planet Earth as a kind of factory for producing vicious and deceitful species, the human race being the best of them. Because those are the ones that survive. So, the survival drive obviously produces very aggressive, very cunning creatures. Otherwise, they wouldn't be dominant. So anyway, the sex drive ensures this continuation. Now, when it comes to men and women, men want to distribute their DNA as widely as possible. They just want, particularly when they're in their teens, 20s, 30s, they just want to go out and they want to fuck as much as possible. In the main, of course it's not everybody, but in the main that's what happens. And men will use any kind of cunning tactic to achieve that end. The 3 words, I love you. They know that women want a secure environment for rearing children. That's what women mainly want. They want a secure environment for child rearing, a nest. And men will pretend that they can offer that just to get the sex. And then once they've had the sex and they're tired of it, they clear off and find another victim. Women, on the other hand, will be, coy and charming and alluring to attract the men. I did speak about the men and weaver birds. Weaver birds, the males spend forever building a nest, and then they hang upside down below the nest and flap their wings to attract a female, and the female just kind of strolls over, has a look. If it's not good enough, she pisses off and goes to look at another nest. And if the male realizes that his nest isn't going to attract females, he'll build another one. And the female just wants a good provider, so a man or a male who's resourceful. This is the way females work. This is the main driver of their psychology. Of course, it's not every female. So if you're not driven that way, then fair enough. But this is the results of very, very extensive surveying. So the guys basically lie and cheat to get sex. The women essentially offer an attractive mating environment. And it's a fact that men and women will not mate with other women and men, respectively, that do not equal their own, how can I put it, fitness for mating. So very attractive, fit, intelligent people will generally go for very intelligent, fit, attractive people. It's all very mechanical, it's all heartless. That's the way it works. The whole romantic thing is quite new. It's only a few hundred years old. And it's a source of endless pain and trouble. So there's the research findings are actually very interesting. So, for example, women in nightclubs and bars, it's been found that they will dress a little bit more suggestively when they're ovulating. They're not necessarily aware that they're ovulating, but that is the point where they are most likely to conceive, and in quite an unconscious way, they dress a little bit more suggestively. And the men in the nightclubs and the bars have been seen to home in on those particular women. Sex is just animal stuff at the end of the day. It's not Hollywood. It's not romance. As much as people like to dress it up that way. And of course, men suffer from sexual jealousy much more than women, because a man can never be sure that a child is his own. A woman is always sure, obviously, but a man cannot be sure. So he's going to be more suspicious, more jealous, if a woman is, in some way flirting with other men. Women are less jealous of that. Women get jealous if they see a man offering his resources and his resourcefulness to another woman. Many women couldn't really give a fuck, literally, about their mates being unfaithful, as long as there's no exchange of resources. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. And yeah, I'm taking my email addresses off from everywhere I can find to take them off. Because I know this is going to upset people, but fuck it, I don't care. I don't owe you anything, and you don't owe me anything. So if it upsets you, just turn it off. So, almost finally, no happy ever after. People are desperate for a happy ever after story. So they're going to go to heaven. The world is going to be eventually consumed in love. You know, Eckhart Tolle's The New Earth. There's going to be some kind of worldwide revolution or change that's going to make everything all right. That progress will lead us towards something. That you can leave a legacy. We all tend towards building our own happy ever after story. Well, you know, the world doesn't work like that. 127 million people were slaughtered in the last century in wars, uprisings, revolutions, and all the rest of it. Every one of those people will have had a happy ever after story, or most of them will. And yet, there we go. They died in the gulag, or being tortured in some fucking torture chamber in, I don't know, Germany, wherever. So there is actually no happy ever after story here. And again, it's immensely freeing when you can approach the world in that way and not fool yourself that actually it's all going to turn out all right. Because the bottom line is that in the world there are destructive and there are constructive forces. We want to be associated with the constructive forces because they're life-affirming in the main. And we want to shun the destructive forces. I mean, at any moment there are galaxies colliding. There are stars and their planetary systems being consumed by black holes. There are supernovas exploding and burning everything within, you know, 1 trillion light years. Well, not literally, but you know, within a very large radius. Things are just fried. So, you know, the destruction's going on all the time. And yeah, it could be that human beings are just basically like a cancer on the planet, here to essentially destroy the whole fucking thing. I mean, it might not be, but it kind of looks like that a bit, doesn't it? So, you know, even Shakespeare said, well, you know, if you think your life's a pile of shit, then, you know, after death it might be even more shit. And there are people who go chasing after pleasure. Well, I'll have more to say about pleasure in a moment. But you should know that in the main, for every pleasure there's a pain. It's just the way it works. So finally, freedom. Most people, when they think about freedom, think about lots of money so they can do what they want, maybe endless sexual partners, maybe having no ties to anything, you know, just hit the road, go off the grid. You know, none of it works, because life will not let you off the hook. So here's the bottom line with freedom. You cannot have freedom and security at the same time. There are opposite ends of a scale. The more security you want, the less freedom you will have. Now, the obvious thing, of course, is Mr. 9 to 5 or Mrs. 9 to 5, my little home, my pet dog, my, you know, family, my blah blah blah, totally constrained by the nature of their relationships, the fact that they have to earn money. Maybe they're dogmas, maybe they've got some religious stuff going on. And then they say they want freedom. Well, you can't have freedom because you've filled your mind full of shit. You are committed to a whole pile of stuff that makes you feel secure. How can you possibly have freedom? The worst kind of security, of course we see security as a positive thing very often, but the worst kind of security is dogma. Now, most people, because as I mentioned earlier, most people want to fill in the blanks. They'll accept some kind of dogma, religious dogma, philosophical dogma, ideologies, whatever. Because it answers all the questions, makes them feel secure. But of course, if your mind is full of dogma, then it isn't free. Obviously, because anything that would oppose your dogma is rejected. So there's no freedom. And then there's things like friends and family. Some people see security in lots and lots of friends. There's a price to be paid to gain lots and lots of friends. You have to agree with those people, because generally speaking, people only submit to a friendship if they're with someone who agrees with them. You're not going to be friends with someone who's disagrees with everything you say. So again, to be totally accepted within a large body of friends and family, you're going to have to lose your freedom in exchange for the security that offers. I mean, really, it doesn't offer any security, but people think it does. Or, things like obsessive concerns with health. Again, you want security, don't want to die, don't want to be ill. Is that freedom? Well, no, not really. I mean, obviously we look after ourselves, but to be obsessive about it is something else. So, freedom. To wind this whole thing up, it's gone on much longer than I thought it would. Freedom. There's no purpose. That's an immense freedom. There's no meaning. Another freedom. Unknowing. You don't know what you are. You don't know what fucking time and space is. You don't know about birth and death. You don't know anything really about stuff that really matters. And that is a freedom. And there is no happy ever after. Another freedom. You don't need to go chasing it if you can just accept there is no happy ever after. Of course, to do all of this stuff, and if you've listened all the way through this, then you have demonstrated to some extent what I'm going to mention right now, is to do all of this stuff, to see that there's no purpose, to see the real nature of our evolutionary drive, to see there's no happy ever after, to see that you can't have security if you want to be free and so on. It needs courage. More than anything else, it needs courage. Without courage, you will just be, as Spinoza and Gurdjieff say, a puppet driven by life that is used and then dumped upon your death. Is that any different for people who have faced all this stuff? Well, yes, it is actually. I mean, the fate after death may be exactly the same, but the life is completely different. But that's another podcast.